Hello, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Pipe Dream, the podcast for B2B marketers, founders, and go-to-market leaders navigating the post-AI marketing landscape. My name's Jason Bradwell, and each episode we profile the companies and individuals that have stopped competing on information and started building media that actually differentiates. I'm really excited for today's guest because she is one who has helped define modern branded content from inside some of the world's biggest media companies. Melanie was the first ever editor of branded content at the New York Times Brand Studio. She was a founding member of HuffPost's Partner Studio, director of creative strategy for Time Inc., and has supported brand storytelling across 35 plus titles, including Time, People, and Sports Illustrated. Now, as a creative leader and keynote speaker, Melanie helps Fortune 100 businesses and high growth B2B companies turn creativity from a random spark into an organized, repeatable system. She's authored 2 marketing books that are media IP in their own right, The Content Fuel Framework and Prove It, which give marketers a practical framework for backing up their claims with genuine proof so that skeptical, information-saturated buyers actually believe them. Melanie, welcome to Pipe Dream.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to be here.
Yeah, and this is obviously the second time that we have spoken on a podcast of mine, the first obviously being the B2B Better podcast a few years ago now. It feels like back in COVID time, we last spoke.
It's a time warp, yeah.
That time that we've all just kind of repressed. But we will link to the old episode in the show notes of this one. So, Melanie, just diving straight in, you were the first editor of branded content at the New York Times Brand Studio. You helped create some of the most acclaimed native advertising in the industry. Obviously, that was before AI could generate content in seconds. Now, any brand, theoretically, can pump out thousands of articles with ChatGPT. Should they do that? Probably not. But from your vantage point, having created content at the highest level, what do you think the difference is between content that AI can replicate and create and content that actually cuts through? Like, where does that line exist?
It's really interesting because I haven't put a ton of thought into like specific older projects of mine and trying to think like what parts of that could AI replicate. But I actually think some of the branded content stuff we did is the most defensible in the age of AI. So a piece I'm thinking of in particular is one we did with Netflix for Orange is the New Black. And I probably put 40 hours of like research and writing into that piece. Now, some of the research probably could be done by ChatGPT, could have saved me some work of like finding different things. But a lot of what I did was interviewing people who had either been to prison or prison reform workers, psychologists, sociologists, like ChatGPT, at least right now, is not going to call them up and get them to open up about the emotional experiences they've had. It's probably not going to do as good a job of selecting which points, work well together to illustrate a point. And a lot of what we talked about in those pieces was actually like the human experience, the emotional side, the sensory experience of being in prison. Like, ChatGPT can't smell. It can't love. It can't wonder, like there's all these human elements that it just cannot tap into with any sort of believability. And so I think the more human our content is, the more defensible it will be. And so the best branded content is going to be the stuff that leans into the human side of things.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I want to talk a little bit about how that relates to, kind of bias, skepticism around AI generated content. You've obviously written a book called Prove It. It's all about helping marketers back up their claims with genuine proof rather than just making, assertions. It feels incredibly relevant right now because AI can make any claim sound convincing, but it can't actually necessarily prove anything. When you're working with B2B companies, what are you seeing about how buyer skepticism has changed? Are they more cynical now that they know that content can be generated instantly? And what does that mean for brands in terms of how they need to approach proving their claims?
It's interesting. So the book came out in 2022, which means I wrote it in 21 and 22, right? And even at that point, and this was before like the big chat GPT bloom, and this like AI becoming as mainstream as it is now, we were in the most skeptical consumer environment we had ever been in. Like all the studies up to that point were showing that like more and more people don't believe anything they see, anything they hear. They just believe everything is false. We were in the age of like fake news and like alternative facts. Like we were in an age of people just like making up their own stuff, right? And that was the big threat at that point. And so Now, I mean, don't have updated data, right? I'm sure that those studies are being done now, but I can imagine with things like deep fakes and, these like the AI videos getting more and more difficult to discern, the photos getting, harder to tell apart from real images, it's only going to get worse. I'm sure it only has gotten worse. And so when we talk about proving it, it's about bringing evidence of those claims. It will always be easy for anyone to claim anything they want. They can say they're the best. They can say they produce results. They can say they do all these awesome things. Where brands can differentiate themselves is actually bringing in the information that shows this is really true. Let them see it with their own eyes, let them hear it with their own ears, let them give them the proof that you're not just saying it, you're actually doing it. It's going to make a huge difference in a world where, again, anybody can say anything and it becomes easier and easier to fabricate that background.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your other book, The Content Fuel Framework, gives marketers a system for generating story ideas by combining different content focuses with different content formats. I'm curious to know your thoughts. If AI can generate unlimited ideas instantly, what's the value of a framework for idea generation? And with these frameworks, are we trying to teach people how to outthink AI, or are we trying to teach them something that AI fundamentally can't do?
It's a really good question. I think that in a lot of ways, AI can do some of those things, right? Idea generation. I think what is interesting is that a lot of the best ideas are actually a combination of other ideas that are already out there. And that's kind of what the system is teaching, right? The combination of a focus, what are we talking about, and a format, how we bring it to life. So, in that way, some of that stuff can totally be done by AI. And I'm sure there are people who are using it for that purpose. What I will say is that if we are all using the same tools with the same kind of prompts, we're going to be getting the same kind of answers. And so, is it capable? Yes. Will it be unique and differentiated? Probably not. And I think that's where your own human experience, your perspective, your sensory experiences, the memories, the dreams, the curiosity, the things that just cannot be done outside of the human brain, at least not yet, are going to be what makes those ideas more interesting, those ideas more differentiated, makes them more compelling. Because just because you can do something doesn't mean it will be interesting or entertaining or fun. I think most people, if you've ever like asked ChatGPT to write a joke or asked an AI tool to like write a joke or say something funny, will find very quickly that it doesn't approximate that very well. And so if you're trying to make things that are fun and interesting and entertaining, things that evoke emotion, like that's not the specialty. So at the core, can it come up with ideas? Totally. They're probably not going to be the best ones that are most interesting for your audience, most fun for you to create, and most compelling for anyone to consume.
Yeah. I'm curious to get your thoughts on like almost like the ethics of using AI, from a trust and transparency perspective, and how you would be thinking about and advising some of your customers on how they should be using AI to generate content. Like, is there an ethical or strategic line between AI assisted, AI generated that actually matters to B2B audiences, or is it something that just marketers tell themselves like we need to find that line?
I'm sure there's a line somewhere, but I'm reminded very much of like what years was it? It was like 2013 or so when we were trying to figure out how to label sponsored content. Do you remember this era of like, should we call it sponsored content or branded content or presented by or sponsored by? And God, we were all up in arms for years and talking to the FTC about how do we label this stuff. And
Yeah.
it turns out that like the average consumer does not care, does not have nuance between all of these things. They really just wanted to know like, did a brand have something to do with this? Yes or no? And their bigger question was, does it add value? So I think we'll probably land somewhere similar where it's like, would it be nice to have disclosure to know that this was created? Like, I think there's a betrayal factor when you find out. I know with branded content, there's a betrayal factor. If you find out late that it was sponsored and you didn't know, it gives you a really negative brand response. AI is probably similar. If I know I'm watching an AI video, I can appreciate what it is and enjoy it. If I find out afterward, after I believed it, now I feel duped. I feel stupid. I feel tricked. Like, that's not a good experience. So I have to imagine we're going to land somewhere similar. Like, we'll find out that the disclosure is important from a trust standpoint, but that if that disclosure is reasonably clear, people can approach it for what it is and appreciate it for what it is. I always err on the side of more transparency. and more disclosure just because I come from a journalism background, like, cover your bases. That's how I feel. But I have to imagine that on some level, this is also very similar to the panic of like, remember in school when our teachers were like, you're never going to have a calculator in your pocket. Like you have to show the work. Like that's
Mm,
not so much of an issue now. So I think there's probably also that tool curve of at some point there will just be an assumption that these kinds of tools are being used on some level and you want to
mm.
just disclose when that's possible, right?
Yeah. I'm pretty sure I read an article, or maybe even I saw it. Like, was there a Netflix film or TV show that at the end had a disclaimer that they had used AI to like do a building falling or something like that? Or maybe I'm making that up,
I
but
don't know, but that would be cool. Like I'd like to see that, right? Where um I think we get really precious about these things. Like even remember how much flack like George Lucas got for using CGI in some of the early like Star Wars. I mean, that's not an issue now. You just assume there's computers all over everything that you're watching, right? So I think it'll be very similar. We'll have that discomfort where it feels incorrect, it feels unethical, and there are without a doubt some major ethical issues when we look at like diversity and stereotyping and some of the access to these tools absolutely present some very real issues. But I do think that there's just an adoption curve that will get more and more comfortable accepting that these tools are going to be built into everything we do and it's just going to be par for the course at some point.
absolutely. So your newsletter, Creative Constructs, gives
Yeah.
creators and marketers systems for organized creativity, I think is what you call it,
Yeah.
including when and how to use AI without letting it flatten your originality. And that's a really interesting kind of tension. So could you walk us through and the listeners through any thoughts or frameworks that you have around when AI actually helps creativity versus when it just makes everything sound the same? How do you use AI without letting it take over?
So there's a couple things. I mean, I use just to be clear, like I use ChatGPT is my tool of choice. So that's, the generalized term I use, but I use these kinds of tools often. What I don't use them for is wholesale creation of things. I actually enjoy creating things. I enjoy writing. That's the stuff I want to do. So I use these tools to free me up to do more of that by taking on the things that are less interesting to me. So for me, that involves a lot of research. I will start there. I do double check everything, but I'll say, hey, I'm looking for some studies that, speak to this particular topic. Can you find some reputable studies and link them so that I can then go and find it? It's saving me probably an hour of digging through different libraries and journals and things, and then I can go and find those things quickly and easily to double check. So I use it for things that, again, free me up to do the creative work I want. I think that's helpful. I think it enables us to do more things. I also recommend using it to check your blind spots. That's one of the biggest things I use it for. Hey, I'm working on this, or I've written this, or I'm considering this. What am I missing? What am I not seeing? What biases are at play here that I may not realize because of the privilege that I move through this world with, right? What blank spaces need to be filled in? What open questions aren't being addressed? You can use it, again, because it is this amalgamation of the work of others, in the brain space of others, you can have those perspectives that you can't generate on your own. So I see that as incredibly valuable. So those, I mean, those are some of the things I recommend is like outsource the stuff that's less that fills your cup less so you can do more of what you love. And then use it to check your biases and find the blank spots, the holes, the gaps in what you're doing, because that will only make your work better.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great way of thinking about it. And you mentioned that ChatGPT has been your tool of choice. Have you experimented with any of the other LLMs and other tools around your content creation and ideation processes?
Yeah, I have a little bit. I think truthfully, once I find a tool that I really enjoy, I went through a very small experimentation phase that was like probably a year and a half ago where I tried a couple different ones and I just determined at that point which is the most helpful, most beneficial, and most convenient for me. ChatGPT is where it was. I wouldn't argue that it's like the most advanced or the best or anything like that. It's just what works for me and what I'm comfortable in. And now there's a switch cost associated, as there always is, right? Like all my like back channel of conversations of ideas of development is there. But what I am a verbal processor, so the way that I think through ideas is talking about them. And so what I really enjoy using it for honestly is like just talking ideas out as well. It's like, hey, okay, I'm thinking through this thing. Does this make any sense? Like, has this been done before? It's the same thing that I would be doing with a human, except they're less annoyed that I want to talk about the same thing for, 45 minutes straight. So it's less to me, it's almost more just an outlet for documenting what I'm talking about, and it works really well for that sort of stream of consciousness conversations on those different topics.
That makes sense. Shifting gears a little bit,
Yeah.
I want to talk a little bit about this, idea of media and owned media specifically. You've appeared on like hundreds of podcasts. You've
Yeah.
written 2 books. You run masterminds like the Convoy. You obviously
Yeah.
co-founded the Creator Kitchen with our mutual friend Jay
Yeah.
Akunzo. You've turned all the expertise that you've built up over the years into multiple forms of media IP. I think, a lot of marketers and probably business leaders, when they think about media and B2B marketing, they're thinking about the blog post or the white paper. Just walk us through, like, what is the strategic thinking behind building all of these different content formats? Is it distribution? Is it opening up different revenue streams? Is it something else around how you're positioning your expertise?
This is such a good question. You ask great questions. I think
Thank you.
your listeners know that, but you ask. I have been on hundreds of podcasts, and most of these are not things that I've been asked before, which I absolutely love. I wish that I could tell you that I had some grand 10-year plan that I'm executing on. But what I am doing is something that I call creative side quests. And so I'm actually launching um, in 2026, I'm launching a snail mail club where you can get creative side quests, like little challenges kind of sent to you every month in the mail. Because I realize that this has very much been my entire career, my entire life. Is like, I know that I love to make good work and I love to help other people make good work. And I am totally open to whatever form that takes. So sometimes I'm doing courses for LinkedIn Learning. Sometimes I'm making miniature artwork and entering it in the state fair. Sometimes I'm on TikTok, acting a fool. Sometimes I mean, right now I have 4 different book projects that I'm working on that have nothing to do with each other. Like, I am just passionately pursuing making good work with good people and helping them make good work. So it does look like a whole bunch of different things. But I am very open to when opportunities present, feeling like, is this aligned with my mission to like make good work with good people and help them do the same? Then that's probably something that's going to move me toward that life that I'm trying to establish. I don't have it all figured out, but I feel like going on creative side quests is a very fulfilling way to live, in my
Yeah.
opinion.
Yeah, no, I love the idea of creative side quests. It almost like gamifies life, which is
Yeah.
really really cool as a concept.
Yeah.
I'd like to dig a little bit into your, like, you know, what kind of sparks these ideas? Like, what kind of media are you consuming? Like, what is your process, if there is a process, look like around, coming up with, going from, like, creating art that you're submitting to the state fair to, like, running a course on behalf of clients, to writing a book, to starring in a TikTok video. Are these ideas just kind of sparking all the time and you're pulling them into something and coming back to them at another day? Like, what does that whole process look like?
So, one of the things that I really like to do is I like to pull the threads. And so, when I talk about creativity, it really is 2 distinct forms of thinking. It is the divergent thinking, diverge to go apart. That's the like, yes, and dream big, no bad ideas. Like, you're just in brainstorm mode. And then there's the refining, right? That's the convergent thinking where you bring reality back in and you're like, we don't have the budget, we don't have the time, we can't do that. That's not strategic. So I try to spend as much time as possible in that divergent mode. So when I first have a thought, like, and they don't always work out. Like, I'll just give you a great example. So in COVID, I had this idea. I was like, why do vending machines only have snacks? Like, we should have vending machines for all kinds of things. And I know that's not original. Like, many other countries have more of that practice. But I was thinking, like, I don't know, like, why don't ladies' restrooms have, like, like, makeup, sponges in, like, a quarter machine? Because 'Cause you're always gonna need a touch-up, like, those kinds of things. Why can't I get a bookmark at the bookstore from a quarter machine? Like, those kinds of things. And so, I played that out. Like, I used ChatGPT, I built stuff out, and I just was like, "For a whole day, I'm just gonna entertain this." Like, what could I do if I were distributing things through vending machines throughout the world, right? And I loved living in that space. I got so creative. I had so much fun. I had a whole plan for like co-working spaces should give out chargers. Like, I don't know. It was just all crazy. It didn't make a lot of sense financially, but it was a lot of fun. Now, that didn't develop into a business. That wasn't something that like is going to come forth in the world, but it did inspire me to think about how can I deliver things in unexpected ways, which then leads to other things that's how I'm doing the creative quest coming in the mail, right? So I don't always bring the full ideas to fruition, but I see so much value in staying in that divergent phase of like, yes, and think it through, keep building, keep going, because we jump to editing and shutting things down so quickly that we never get big enough to make use of those ideas. You know,
Mm,
if I
mm.
shut that down and I was like, oh, vending machines are not like a financially responsible investment, and I just let it go, I wouldn't build to a point where I can then do a spinoff. Right. So I think a big part of it is just a willingness, like, seeing value in that imagining and allowing that to happen, even if it doesn't turn into something every time.
That's awesome. Your creativity, your originality is infectious. And I'm sure a lot of marketers listening to this podcast are kind of nodding their heads along saying, you know, I'm feeling really enthusiastic to go and try some like crazy shit today.
Yeah.
And that's what we want, right? But
Yep.
then as we look at wrapping up this interview, I just want your kind of like 60-second advice for those marketers who maybe have been beaten down a little bit in their organization when it comes to originality, when it comes to creativity, when it comes to, pushing the envelope a little bit. How do you convince your stakeholders that it's worth taking the risk, that it's worth
Yeah.
creating space to pull the thread, as you so eloquently put it?
I have no illusions about the fact that this kind of activity, this kind of creative, aspiration is not possible in every environment. And I say that not to be a downer, but because we need to change the environments, right? So if you are in a leadership position, if you are in a position to change that culture, then that's something you should absolutely do. The biggest thing is to acknowledge those two types of thought, the convergent or the divergent thinking, thinking big, and the convergent thinking, thinking small. They are both important and you need both, but you definitely need both and they need to be separate. So, as a leader, creating those two separate sections of your brainstorm allows the convergent thinkers to feel heard and to refine the ideas while still allowing for the psychological safety for people to think big. So sometimes just acknowledging that and splitting them apart makes a huge difference. If you're not in a leadership position and you can't restructure the brainstorm and you don't feel like the culture is within your hands, the easiest step to start shifting that is to start blaming process instead of people. Anytime on the creative side something doesn't go the way it should, ask the question, how can we change our process? Because everyone's on board for that. How do we fix the process? How do we make this not happen next time? How do we change the process so we have time to do the stuff we want to do? How do we fix the process so we deliver better results? Everyone's on board for that, and nobody's to blame. So, blaming the process instead of the people is a very tiny thing you can do to start meaningfully changing the culture within your team to be open to more creative risk taking.
Love that. What a mic drop to end this episode of Pipe Dream on. We will be sure to drop the links to your books, your LinkedIn profile, your newsletter, your website, all of the different forms of media that you are investing so much time and energy into in the show notes of this episode. Melanie, it has been an absolute pleasure and privilege to once again invite you onto my podcast. We will not be leaving it as long until we do episode number 3. That's for sure. Is there anything you want to leave us with before we wrap up today?
I invite you all, go on a creative side quest. Do something fun and unexpected sometime soon. It brings so much joy into your life. And Jason, I can't wait to go on another creative side quest with you soon.
Absolutely. Melanie, thank you so much for coming on to Pipe Dream, and we'll catch you down the line.
Thanks for having me.